My name is Captain Jonathan Ellis. I'm 44 years old, and I've spent the last 20 years serving in the IT division of the United States Army. I wear the uniform with pride because it's more than fabric and patches. For me, it's a reflection of the family I come from and the values I carry. My father was a Vietnam veteran who believed that honor was something you lived by, not just talked about. My mother taught English in a small-town school for over 3 decades, and she raised me to believe that words matter, promises matter, and your name means something. I grew up in a house where the flag wasn't just a decoration. It was a daily reminder of duty, sacrifice, and trust. From the day I enlisted, I believed in the mission. Not just the military's mission, but my own. I wanted to serve quietly but meaningfully, to protect, not with weapons but with code and systems that shielded lives in ways most people would never even see. I've always thought of myself as a guardian behind the curtain. Someone who makes sure the lights stay on the walls, stay secure, and the secrets stay safe. There was never a question in my mind that I'd give everything to this job. My loyalty wasn't for sale. My work was precise, my record clean, and my heart was always in the right place. I trusted the system because I helped build it. I believe in the people around me because they wore the same uniform. And for 2 decades, that belief never wavered. Until the day it did. It started like any other late night at the base. I was reviewing server health logs, just routine maintenance before the monthly systems audit. My eyes moved across the terminal like muscle memory until I saw something that didn't belong. A flagged line in the encrypted comms cache. Normally messages like that would auto-delete per clearance protocol, but this one slipped through. A single misfire in the purge script. I decrypted the file without thinking. It was second nature by now. I thought it was a redundancy test, maybe even a training packet left behind. But it wasn't. It was an internal memo from Brigadier General Thorne to Colonel Mendez, and it had my name in the subject line. The title said Contingency Plan Ellis Replacement. My chest went tight. I read the body twice, just to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting it. The general wrote that I was too inflexible, too bound by regulation. My adherence to protocol had made me more of a liability than an asset. He said I was difficult to control. A relic of old-school values in a system that was evolving past men like me. I stared at the screen for minutes that felt like hours. I'd spent the better part of my adult life building this infrastructure. Line by line. Access control layers, encryption routing, and security protocols. Every digital artery in this place passed through systems I helped design. Now they were discussing how to surgically cut me out, behind my back. On my system. It was like hearing your own family plot your removal from the dinner table. Not because you'd done something wrong, but because you wouldn't bend your spine. The same people I trusted with my career, my clearance, my belief in the mission, they saw me as an obstacle. Not a man. Not a teammate. Just a variable to be managed and eventually deleted. And the worst part, they didn't even bother to hide it well. Their betrayal sat right there on a server I had kept clean and secure for years. I think that's what stung the most. Not that they wanted me gone, but they felt so safe doing it under my nose. Like I'd become invisible. I closed the message. My hands hovered over the keyboard. 1,000 thoughts screamed at once. I wasn't just angry. I was hollow. The kind of hollow that comes after you've given your life to something and watched it spit you out without blinking. The kind of hollow that doesn't go away quietly. All those nights, I stayed late. The birthdays, I missed. I swallowed the silence when I saw bad decisions and said nothing. I thought I was protecting something greater than myself, but it turns out I was just protecting them. And they never intended to protect me back. That's when it shifted. That's when the loyalty cracked. Not loud. Not with yelling or rage. Just a quiet break in the foundation. A fracture deep enough to change everything. For 7 years, I poured everything I had into one project. a disaster recovery framework so airtight it could hold through a full-scale cyber assault or a satellite outage without breaking rhythm. We called it StratNet Reserve, but to me it was more than a system. It was my legacy. The architecture was a multi-layered lattice of failovers, each node capable of operating autonomously for up to 96 hours. Data replicated across 3 continents encrypted in unique cycles tied to mission schedules. Even if one region went dark, the system rerouted through satellite overlays or underground bunkers with 0 packet loss. It wasn't a feature. It was the foundation. Plenty of engineers had access. Some even signed off on updates. But no one else really understood the core logic. I'd written the redundancy map, I hand-modeled every potential breakpoint with simulations, then rebuilt the system to self-heal. I didn't just build it. I understood how it breathed. People think security is about walls, but it's about rhythm. Knowing how long a packet should take, where latency spikes become suspicious. I knew those rhythms like my own heartbeat. I could spot anomalies in a 2-second drift and trace it to the server rack in Qatar. That wasn't training. That was instinct. It was never about being the only one with keys. It was about knowing which doors didn't need locks, because no one else even knew they existed. And if something ever went wrong, they'd call me. Not because of protocol, but because deep down they knew I was the only one who could fix it. Or break it. There was one part of the system I never documented. A silent trigger embedded deep in the architecture. A dead man's switch. It wasn't meant to destroy anything or compromise national security. It simply rerouted truth to where it could no longer be buried. If my user profile were ever deactivated without protocol, if access logs showed a forced lockout, if the handover didn't follow the exact chain of custody I'd designed, the system would quietly begin its shift. A concealed batch of audit logs, encrypted metadata, and internal communications would transfer to an independent relay node I'd mirrored years ago. The node sat on neutral ground, off-grid, outside the Department of Defense jurisdiction. It wasn't some rogue server in a basement. It was part of a civilian oversight program meant to flag compliance gaps during drills. They'd forgotten it even existed. I hadn't, and that made all the difference. I didn't install it out of spite. I built it out of necessity. After seeing too many flags ignored, too many good people silenced, I knew I needed something more than ethics to lean on. I needed leverage, but the kind that didn't come from revenge. It came from responsibility. The switch didn't expose the entire system, just the rot beneath the surface. Misuse of funding, intelligence, reroutes, names that should have stayed off blacklists but didn't. It wasn't a weapon. It was light, focused, clean, the kind that only activates when someone tries to turn it off. I never told anyone. Not my not my team, not even the oversight division that signed off on the disaster protocols. It was mine, a final layer, my way out if the mission I served ever turned on me. Not to break the code, but to honor it when no one else would. The summons came mid-morning. No warning. No pretext. Just a request to report to the CO's office immediately. I knew what was coming. Not from the tone of the email, but from the silence that followed it. When I walked in, 3 of them were waiting. Colonel Mendez, Lieutenant Brooks from admin, and Major Klein, the one from legal. They kept their words clinical. Operational needs. Structural alignment. Budget constraints. Not once did anyone say the truth out loud. That I had become inconvenient. That a man who refused shortcuts was no longer worth the salary. Instead, they introduced my replacement. Lieutenant Eric Shaw, 28, fresh from Cyber Command, eyes full of ambition and no scars to slow him down. He shook my hand like he expected a blessing. I gave him a nod. That was all I could manage. I handed over my admin codes, my asset keys, and signed the release documents. Every motion felt rehearsed. But I left one field empty. One segment of authentication that looked filled but wasn't. A silent omission embedded inside a procedural handoff. It would pass surface checks, but when the system really needed it, it would reach for something that wasn't there. They thanked me for my service, said I'd be given full retirement benefits and a transition liaison. I nodded again, bit down on the bitterness rising in my throat. I wanted to tell them how wrong they were. How easily they'd traded 20 years of battle-tested loyalty for someone who smiled more during briefings. As I turned to leave, I paused at the threshold. I didn't look back, just let the words slide out low and steady. You think you can cut me off like an Ethernet cable? Let's see what disconnect really feels like. Then I walked away, not defeated, just quiet, waiting. 48 hours after I turned in my badge, the system blinked. Not a crash. Not a hack. Just a quiet shift in routing patterns. A mirror relay began dripping flagged documents into external logs. Not random files. Specific ones. Internal audits. Redirected funding approvals. Communications marked eyes only. The kind of files that don't just raise eyebrows. They end careers. The incident response team scrambled. They brought in civilian contractors, even reached out to a liaison from the NSA. But every time they traced the breach, the trail folded back into itself. No IP anomaly. No access violations. Just a signature embedded so deep even their top analysts couldn't pass it. Because it wasn't an attack. It was a design they never understood. The real panic didn't start until the names came out. Not code names. Real ones. Officers who'd ghosted procurement reviews. Mid-level execs flagged for ghost accounts. A paper trail, so clean it could have only been gathered from someone who knew the timing of internal cleanups. They knew then it wasn't a breach. It was exposure. The next morning, Colonel Mendez showed up at my front door. No escort. No threats. Just a man out of breath, his collar loose tie, crooked face pale. He didn't ask questions. He made offers. Full reinstatement. Promotion to lieutenant colonel. Triple pay. Command over the new cyber oversight unit. Just fix it, he said. Help us get ahead of this before it sinks everything. I listened, let him lay it all out. Then I stepped aside and let him stand there in my living room while I poured coffee. I didn't rush. I didn't reassure him. I just watched him sweat. He thought he was dealing with a disgruntled vet. What he didn't understand was that I had never lost control. I'd simply stopped protecting the lie. I nodded eventually. Said I'd come in. Review the breach. Assess the damage. He looked like I'd thrown him a lifeline. But he didn't know I wasn't planning to plug the leak. I was going to watch what spilled out. Because this wasn't sabotage. It was the truth finally catching up. And it was just getting started. When I walked back into the control center, no one looked me in the eye. The same officers who once laughed behind closed doors were now pacing like cornered men. Monitors flashed non-stop. Logs rerouting. Red alerts are spiking across the board. No one could tell where the leak started, but they all knew what was slipping through it. I stood in the center of the room watching chaos unfold around me. It wasn't loud. It was quiet in the way dread often is. Everyone moved fast, but with no real direction. Some barked orders. Others whispered into phones. And then there were those just staring at their screens, watching their secrets roll into daylight. No one dared to ask me how it happened. They just hoped I could stop it. I didn't rush. I let the damage breathe. Let it shine light on the dark corners they thought no one could reach. And only when enough had been seen, when enough questions had been asked, did I sit at the terminal. I typed slowly, deliberately. Line by line, I navigated to the kernel routines, the switch triggers, and the redirection matrix. I didn't patch it. I just returned it to its original state. The system stabilized. The chaos receded. Phones quieted. Colonel Mendez stepped forward, words stuck behind clenched teeth. I stood, unplugged my access card, and placed it gently on the table. He asked if I'd engineered the breach, if I were the one who exposed them. I looked at him then, at every face in the room, and said it plain. I didn't break the system. I just stopped protecting it like I used to. That was all it took. The silence afterward spoke louder than any confession. A week after everything had settled, I got a call from someone I didn't expect. Not a general, not a lawyer. Someone from the Office of Civil Oversight. They'd been following the breach reports, quietly reviewing what surfaced. They didn't ask how I did it. They asked if I wanted to help fix what was broken from the inside, this time with full transparency. They offered a consulting role. Strategic advisor on ethical cybersecurity policy. Not just technical cleanups. Real reform. I didn't answer right away. I took a few days to think. Not about the job. About whether I still believed it was worth saving. The press wanted interviews. A few networks even offered exclusive deals. I turned them all down. I wasn't looking to be famous. I didn't want to be the face of anything. I just wanted to know I'd done something that mattered, even if it never had a nameplate or a headline. Before I left my apartment for the last time, I packed only a few things. Most of it could be replaced. One thing couldn't. A white ceramic mug with a faded logo. The old unit's emblem is still barely visible under years of wear. I ran my thumb over it, smiled, and slipped it into my bag. As I stepped outside, the morning light hit differently. The streets were the same, but something inside felt new. Not perfect, but lighter. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I wasn't invisible anymore. I knew that silence wasn't the only option. And as I walked down the sidewalk, the sun warm on my face, one thought stayed with me. At least this time they listened.